Alright, so that last video was a sort of proof of concept thing, so I didn't make any big to-do over returning to YouTube, and I still won't, because I'm not back fully. This is definitely more of an if I have an idea I want to try situation, and not a permanent return. But hello out there, yes, it's me, although it's not the same me as the one who left. We all change when you think about it. We're all different people all through our lives, and that's okay. That's good. You gotta keep moving so long as you remember all the people that you used to be. Okay, maybe I'm still a little similar, still quoting Doctor Who, but I think I'm finished with the character review. I think part of what burned me out was that it felt like I was always just myself when I was 15, locked into that persona. Now I'm just gonna be me. Now, in the moment. I'm also going to try some new things. I never truly broke from a strict format. I used to try, but things are going to be kind of loosey-goosey now. Borrow some elements from the BookTube girlies and see how they fit. So, with all that preamble out of the way, this is going to be what I believe they call a wrap-up. I was intending to go all in and do a 2024 wrap-up, but I'm still working on that. I read a lot of books in 2024, if you can believe it. So I'm going to skip ahead and do a wrap-up for January and February, in which I read a significantly smaller amount of books than I did in an entire year. So, let's do it. The first book that I read this year was The Golem of Brooklyn by Adam Mansbach, which was, in the words of the only Jew who the titular Golem will listen to, pretty good. But even as generous a reviewer as I am, I only gave it 3 stars, because it just sort of ends with a bunch of lingering plot threads left abandoned. Plus, the book has a habit of meandering at certain parts. The premise is really interesting. It's that Len Bronstein, an ethnically Jewish art teacher, gets really high and builds a golem out of stolen clay. Hijinks ensue, and Len goes on a journey with the golem across America, bringing along former Hasid bodega clerk Miri Apfelbaum as they head for a high-profile alt-right neo-Nazi rally, so the golem can fulfill his purpose of protecting the Jewish people from those who might cause them harm. And knocking over a bunch of anti-Semitic chuds holding a Jews will not replace us rally certainly counts. A lot is going on in this book, but nothing really gets a satisfying ending. They get to the rally, but there's no big catharsis of the golem killing Nazi scum. There are various characters who show up once and never again, particularly some of the named alt-right dudes who never really get a real comeuppance, and it ends on a particularly whimpering note. I almost felt like my book had a misprint and it was like missing pages at the end, because it just stops. It's not an awful book, and I had a lot of fun reading it. The satirical and comedic elements are on point. I was just hoping for a little more, you know? The second book I read this year was A Gorgeous Excitement by Cynthia Weiner, and I'm nothing if not timely, so I'm going to crib the most relevant and contemporary SNL character for this portion of the review. Ahem. New York's hottest book is A Gorgeous Excitement. This book has everything. Dramatized versions of real-life murders, cocaine, fake IDs, mental illness, mom, manic episodes, and a truly heartwarming coming-of-age story taking place in 1980s New York City, featuring a very troubled Jewish teenager. The book is a heavily fictionalized take on the Central Park Strangler / Preppy Killer case from 1986, which, if you're unfamiliar, is where 18-year-old Jennifer Levin was found dead in Central Park. Robert Chambers was eventually tied to the scene, but claimed that her death was accidental when he pushed her away while she was trying to sexually assault him. Cynthia Weiner ran in the same circles as Levin and knew Chambers, although she claims that the book is entirely a work of fiction. And it was a really good read. It drew me in immediately with the cover. It's pure New York City. It's got the A-train symbol and the image of Central Park with that distortion over it. Reminds me of that Mr. Krabs meme. And then the idea of a coming-of-age in 80s New York got me. I'm a sucker for a period piece, but the book held my attention the entire time, and I cared about all of the characters. From Nina, the main character, to her friend Stephanie, Nina's mother. It was a wild ride from start to finish, and so it gets 5 stars from me. Next up was Catching the Big Fish by the late, great David Lynch. I was inspired by his untimely passing to read it, and I always feel like a fake David Lynch fan because I've never seen Twin Peaks, but I've seen Dune, I liked him on the Cleveland Show, and I'm a big fan of him as an auteur, even if I've not even begun to scratch the surface of his works. And I particularly enjoyed this book because it gave me an insight into his process, and I gotta say, I love it as a filmmaker. My favorite passage was when he discussed Bob from Twin Peaks and how he just filmed a scene with Frank Silva on a whim, not knowing what he'd do with it, and eventually, through the process and an accidental reflection, turned that random bit of coverage into one of the enduring mysteries of the series. Isn't that just incredible? This book was a great look into one of the greatest creative minds of his generation, and perhaps of all time. May his memory be a blessing, and this couldn't get less than 5 stars from me. And the final book I read in February was Everything is Tuberculosis by John Green. Now, it's probably very apparent from my whole vibe that John and Hank Green have been huge influences on me for years, from Vlogbrothers to Crash Course and SciShow, Hank's music, their books, Nerdfighteria. But what I love even more than all of that is their public outreach. They've always done good work in that sector, the Project for Awesome and the Foundation to Decrease World Suck, and even their various companies that sell coffee and socks and soap, which I use and particularly enjoy, give most of their proceeds to charity, particularly Partners in Health, an organization that does a lot of work for global healthcare, including promoting maternal health in Sierra Leone. Through that organization, John was introduced to a young man named Henry who was battling tuberculosis, which is still around and still afflicting countless people around the world in places with underfunded hospitals who can't afford high-quality testing equipment or effective drugs because healthcare companies are price gouging on life-saving medication and technology for profit. John's been doing work for tuberculosis for years now, and this book is the culmination of a lot of that work, providing an accessible history of the disease, where it comes from, the historical timeline of it, and the life of Henry Reeder and how tuberculosis affected his family and community. I know I'm a generous reviewer, I give everything 5 stars, but John Green has always been able to hold my attention. But this one book, I tore through within 3 days. And in fairness, I was reading an arc that I was trying to let one of my friends read as well. But I don't even think I tore through The Fault in Our Stars that quickly, and I love that book. This is his most important book, and even if a lot of the info I'd gleaned from his myriad videos on the topic of tuberculosis, I was fully present and seated for this one. If you only read one John Green book, make it this one, but also read his other books. 5 stars. Enough said. So, what'd you think of the video? Did I do it right? Have I convinced you to add any of these books to your TBR lists? Have you also read any of these? Feel free to discuss all of that and more in the comments, and I'll see you next time.